Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio, and a very special hello to Sammy Sakum this week. If he is listening as he said he would, he sent me a message saying he'd been looking for the new podcast and hadn't been able to find it. I didn't know you cared, sir, but it is here right now, and I've even sent you a personal link because I love you that much. Moving very swiftly on, this week we are going to be talking about some new news that's come out, and I'm going to be talking to you about my third regional of the season down in Cornwall this past weekend, but it's going to be hopefully less about my games and more about some interesting new decks that have come around. Now, having a look at the news for this week, it's pretty thin on the ground in terms of proper news, so we'll try and go through it quite quickly. We've seen product images of the free booster packs and pins I've told you about. You get one pack of each of the last 3 sets and a pin. It's not terribly exciting. And we know we're getting tins with Kyogre EX and Groudon EX, but we knew about that anyway. They are getting new art, and the new art does actually look a little bit cooler than the old art, so I suppose there's a little bit of a bonus. There has been one new card revealed, and that is Primal Clash's Whiscash, which has again been leaked by someone who's got an English version of this card, and I don't really know how this has happened. Some people are getting English versions of these cards before we've even had the Japanese versions of these cards being leaked. I honestly don't know where this is coming from, to be honest, but I'd like to know because I want to go and get me some of these cards. They look kind of cool. And while we're talking about these cards, I would like to express my enthusiasm for some of the new card design. We've got these new full art cards which are not quite as full art as the old cards, shall we say, but they're basically full art cards, but the bottom kind of 20% of the picture is kind of put over with one particular colour, though you can still see the image underneath it. They look awesome. If you haven't seen them, get yourself over to pokebeach.com, because although I can give you a lot in an audio podcast, I cannot give you visuals, so you'll have to go over there to get the most out of that. Now, the Whiscash, as it is, it's a stage 1, it's got 110 HP, it's water, it's weak to grass, none of this should surprise you. It's got 1 attack for free energy, water gun it does 40, meh, and an attack for 2 water, 2 colourless, which means you can use a double colourless, 120 damage, and 20 damage to each of your benched Pokemon. Now, you could, of course, use the Outragers, your Kyurem, your Reshiram, your Zekrom to, build up these attackers with damage on the bench, or you could even go ahead and just chuck a Mountain Ring as a Stadium or a Mr. Mime on the bench, both of which would block bench damage. So you'd be doing 120 for 4 energy. Now, 120 for 4 energy does not sound particularly good, but it's got Alpha Growth. When you attach an energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, you may attach 2 energy cards. So you can just basically attach a water on turn 1, and then a double colourless and a water on turn 2, and you're going with this dude on turn 2. Now, this could be used in something like a Seismitoad deck to spread damage onto Reshirams nice and early, but the problem with that, of course, is that you're losing, even though you can get the 4 energy on nice and quickly, you're still losing a lot of energy, and you're probably only going to get 1 Earthquake off before you're 1-hit KO'd by an Emerald Slash with a Muscle Band. So, quite interesting, and these new type of abilities they're quite cool. These ancient traits, I believe they're calling them, but they're not spectacular by any stretch. Now, what is quite interesting is Emerald Break, the X and Y 6 set, has been revealed. It's coming out in Japan on March the 14th, and this will be our May set. So this will be the set that we get, the last one before Nationals, which will be essentially the last cards we get from Nationals and Worlds formats. No surprise to see that the set is based around Rayquaza. He is a cover Pokemon, and we can pretty much assume that we're going to see Deoxys in this set as well. Very little information coming out about this particular set at the moment, but, truth be told, there's very little information. One thing that is kind of annoying for the rest of us, they are releasing a 60-card deck in Japan, and it's going to come with 3 copies of Rayquaza EX and 2 copies of Mega Rayquaza EX. We don't get theme decks that good. So, be jealous of our Japanese cousins, shall we say. We've also seen a Ludicolo and an Azumarill. Again, these have ancient traits, and they have these full art cards, or these almost full art cards, but all we can really see is that the Azumarill is fairy and has 100 HP, and the Ludicolo is water and has, I believe, 130 HP. That's about all we can see for the moment. More on those when they are properly revealed. And what I am hoping, ladies and gentlemen, although I can make no promises, it's looking like the Japanese Primal Clash set is going to be revealed between today and next week's podcast. So hopefully next week we can have a really good podcast looking through all the new cards from the new Japanese set and looking at exactly what we should be excited at coming out of these sets. So going forward to my tournament then, I went down to St Austell Regionals this past weekend, and it was the third Regionals of this, little set, but really it was the second Regionals with Phantom Forces being legal. So we'd seen a fair amount from this last weekend, but we hadn't seen, we'd seen a little bit of preparation. We hadn't seen a huge amount of information. We hadn't seen a huge amount of tournaments. We'd seen one deck, and what we saw from last week was we saw Donphan, we saw Evil Tower, we saw Vrizzy and Genesect, and we saw that there was an element of Seismitoad coming out, although I'm not 100% convinced that Seismitoad is going to remain all that great. But we shall see. And then we went into this second tournament. Now it's less representative. There were only around about 45 Masters. That means there was a top 8 and there were no points for top 16. And I went a little bit rogue for this tournament. Now, I am going to have to credit Luke Kirkham with the particular deck. My list, his idea, so I'm not going to be doing a deck breakdown on my YouTube channel. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube. I'm not going to be doing that in a particularly near future, purely because it's not really, although it is my list, it's not my deck with which to do that. But I can tell you about the general idea, and it basically revolves around Dimension Valley. This is a trainer card which reduces the cost of attacks from psychic Pokémon by 1 colourless energy. And what this means is some new Pokémon become a little bit broken. And my deck was largely focused around 3 Pokémon. Mewtwo EX. Now, first of all, you can X-Ball for a single energy on turn 1 with Dimension Valley. That is good. But more importantly, you can X-Ball on turn 2. You attach a Psychic Energy, you attach a second Psychic Energy on turn 2, you then discard that to do 120 damage or 140 with a Muscle Band. And then you need a Dimension Valley in play to pull this off. But let's, for argument's sake, say you go against Seismitoad, you go first on turn 1 of the game, when they haven't attached, any energy. You can't do anything. But then on your first turn of the game, they've presumably got a double colourless energy down, so you can X-Ball for 60 damage, 80 if you've got a Muscle Band on, or even 100 if you've added 2 energy by that point. Now, you could then X-Ball for a KO on the following turn, or if they've got no energy down when you attack, you can still do 40 one turn, and then you can do 140 the next turn with Side Drive, and you're actually KOing EXs on turn 2. It is exceptionally good against EX heavy decks and against Donphan, because when you put a Muscle Band on, you are going to be side driving for 140. This is enough to KO a Donphan, and if they put anything to block it, like an Outrager, your Reshiram, your Kyurem, etc., you can do 140 and one-hit KO them. Now, what we also have in the deck is Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet has that ability which blocks abilities other than those of Psychic Pokemon if it's active, but with a Dimension Valley in play for a single Psychic Energy, it does the damage already on a Pokemon plus 10. Now, if you put a Muscle Band on, then you do essentially 30 on turn 1, you then do 70 on turn 2, and you do 30 on turn 1, 10 plus the Muscle Band, and then on turn 2 you do 30 plus the 10 plus the 20 for the Muscle Band, which is 60, putting them up to 90, and then you do 120 on turn 3, the 90 plus 10 plus 20 for your Muscle Band. You're essentially free hit KOing absolutely anything, as long as you get a Muscle Band on there nice and early. Bad if they've got Psychic Resistance, but mostly you use this to finish off. You would hit with Mewtwo with X-Ball or with Side Drive, you get the KO using your Wobbuffet, and then of course you've got your Wobbuffet active at the end of your turn in order to block your opponent's abilities. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a very cool thing to have indeed. Now, the other Pokemon I played one Chandelure EX, meh, less about that, and I played Drifblim. Now, this was the Shadow Steel Drifblim, 20 damage times the amount of energy special in your opponent's discard pile. And this is very good, and obviously you play Enhanced Hammer with this, so you play against something like Donphan or Gengar, you're going to get a lot of special energy in a discard very quickly, and Donphan is going to be hitting for a bunch of energy. But it's not very good against something like Frizzy and Genesect. However, with Mewtwo, I want to play the Spiritomb as well. You play against something like Frizzy and Genesect, stick a Spiritomb on the bench so they can't use G-Booster, and you just go aggro Mewtwo and you basically win. It had a strong Frizzy and Genesect, I played none of them. A strong Donphan matchup, I played one of them. A strong Seismitoad matchup, I played none of them. And it had what I consider to be a fairly strong Eviltown matchup, and I did play a couple of them throughout the tournament. So you'll see that I wasn't necessarily playing the kind of decks I wanted to play, but that's not the end of the world. Now, the tournament went very, very poorly, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but essentially I played 14 supporters and a computer search, and essentially what this means is that I should, on an average game, if 1 in 4 cards in my deck is a supporter or computer search, and I start the game with 8 cards, my opening hand of 7, plus my drawing on my first turn, I should start with a supporter or computer search. I should actually start with 2 of them per game, on average. Now, that's not always going to work out. But over the 12 games I played, there were 5 where I did not have a supporter on turn 1, and there were 3 where I did not have a supporter on turn 5. Now, there's 2 things I can say about this. Number 1, and I did promise I'm not going to Ross very much on this podcast, so I'll make this very, very quick. That is statistically unlikely to the point of absurdity that in 1 in 4 games I didn't have a supporter after drawing 13 cards from my deck with 15 supporters. That's one thing I could say. It's a little bit of Rossing. I'm not going to do much of that. The other thing is I need to do something about this. Now, I can't just keep chucking supporters in over and over again. There comes a time when chucking supporters into your deck becomes counterintuitive. Now, of course, on the games when I didn't lose because I couldn't draw a supporter, there were plenty of games when I'd N into 5 supporters or Juniper into 6 supporters or something like that. But I was playing free Ultra Ball. I should have played Jirachi. Now, what I'm trying to do here is essentially be constructive, rather than moan about my bad luck. And, you know, statistically, I did have bad luck. I could have played a Jirachi. Now, I wasn't keeping count, but I know for a fact that on at least 3 of the games where I had no supporter till turn 5, I opened with an Ultra Ball. Now, I don't want to Ultra Ball for a Jirachi, for a Juniper or an N on turn 1, but I would have been able to. The other thing is, with the supporters as it is at the moment, maybe I start a Colress on turn 1. And I have to wait for my opponent to bench stuff. Well, that's no good. Maybe I start a Skylar and I have to Skylar for a Juniper because I've got nothing. Well, that's no good. So, Jirachi basically means I open with a Skylar, I need an N, so I can use that. The other thing is, late game, I can grab an N if my opponent takes a big lead. I can, if I've got 2 cards left and I draw into an Ultra Ball, I can turn that into a Jirachi and get a Colress for 10, which will probably get me the game, or I can Jirachi for a Skylar to get me the trainer card, which is going to win me the game, be that an Energy Search, or Professor Letter it is nowadays, or, you know, something like, I don't know, maybe a Muscle Band or something along those lines. Or I can, you know, Jirachi for a Lysandra to take my last couple of prizes. Now, there were many reasons I didn't play Jirachi, and I consider them to have been sound reasons at the time. Reason number 1, I was playing for Wobbuffet. The chances are, if I, you know, I'm going to start Wobbuffet. I think it was something like 1/3 of my basics were Wobbuffet. So even if I started no supporter, I had like a 1 in 3 chance I was going to start Wobbuffet, and Wobbuffet turns off Jirachi's ability. Also, there were issues in that I didn't want to start with Jirachi, and next time, and I will play Jirachi in a tournament if I play this deck again, I'm going to tell you how many times I started with Jirachi. And hopefully it will be 0, and I will have to apologise for my pessimism, but we shall see. But the other reason was, you know, and I've told you the stats, that 1 in 4 cards was a supporter, I should start with 2 every game. I thought that I was playing enough supporters that this wasn't going to matter, but essentially, I think it was a mistake not to play Jirachi. I believe I've been underestimating Jirachi, so rather than this turning into a moan at the start of the podcast, ooh, I got so unlucky, etc., I want to instead turn this into a kind of an argument to play Jirachi, a manifesto, if you will. Yeah, my opponent can take 2 easy prizes off it near the end of the game. Well, if that's the case, that's the case. But, you know, if I'm sitting there for 5 turns without a supporter, well, truth be told, I probably I would rather have a Jirachi on the bench so they can get 2 prizes for, and not lose because I draw dead. The other thing is you don't have to bench Jirachi, you can save it till the end of the game, and if I played, for instance, 13 supporters, a computer search and a Jirachi, I still shouldn't be drawing dead. So, in a lot of games I'm not going to need my Jirachi. I can save him to bench at the last minute to get a Lysandra or something along those lines. It was a mistake not to play him. On a related note, and I don't really have time to go through this today, all those people out there that are playing like 10 supporters and 4 VS Seeker, you are going to whiff a supporter on turn 1 quite regularly. I mean, if I'm whiffing it so often with 15 supporters, imagine how often you're going to whiff with 10 supporters and 4 VS Seeker. Now, one of the things I will tell you I've learned from this format is that VS Seeker is strong, unimaginably strong. I played 0 the previous week with Seismitoad and I missed it. I played 2 this past week in my Psychic deck, and good golly, I wanted more. I could easily have gone through 3 or 4 per game. It's stunning. I'm behind. I'm going to get an N. My opponent have got big benches, I'm going to get a Colrus. I've used all 4 ends I'm about to deck out. No, I've got a VS Seeker I'm not going to deck out. 2 Lysandra, 2 VS Seeker essentially turns into 4 Lysandra. VS Seeker is broken, but my appeal to all of you lovely people listening to this podcast, play VS Seeker. It is a beast of a card. I've been using the word broken on the podcast a lot lately, and I think VS Seeker could get close to this stage. But it's not a turn 1 supporter. It is consistency late game, it is options. Now, in terms of the battle compressor to get rid of your supporters and VS Seeker to play them engine, I did play against a chap using this during the day. Bear in mind, to have a supporter on turn 1, you've got to hit a battle compressor and you've got to hit a VS Seeker. But I haven't really tested it enough to give you an opinion, but I will let you know in future weeks how useful this is. Maybe give you an interview with someone who's been using it. So, that's essentially what went wrong in my tournament, and that's the deck that I was playing. Now, in testing, I love the deck, and I stand by the deck. I didn't get a real chance to play it out today, but I still wasn't playing an optimal list. I've gone and made half a dozen changes since the tournament, and unfortunately, it looks like I'm not going to be able to make either of the regionals coming up in 2 weeks in England. We have, I say England, in the UK, there is a Scotland regional on a week Saturday, and Shoreham regional down in the south a week Sunday. Now, I shan't be making either of them, but after that we've got a bunch of cities coming up, so I'm going to be going to a bunch of cities, and I imagine I'll play this deck at a few of those cities. And I expect to have a little more success than I did today, and I'll report back, and when it's the right time, if it's a good deck, I'll be giving you a testing deck breakdown, showing you a little bit more about it on my YouTube channel. Now, in terms of the tournament as a whole, round 1 I play Terry Goodacre. Now, actually, before we get there, before I even started the tournament, I almost dropped, because someone nicked my deck. Now, to be fair, it was partly my own fault. I left it on a table on my playmat with a bunch of my friends at the table. My friends wandered off from the table, someone nicked my deck. Which is just unforgivably scummy. Now, it turned up in the bag of a particular player when I was literally, the player roster had been taken. I was on the verge of dropping, trying to get my money back and just going home. I wasn't going to play with a borrowed deck. I wasn't, shall we say, feeling it at that particular stage. But we're sitting there and I don't have a deck, and eventually it turns up in a player's bag. Now, I won't tell you which player this was, although people in the UK will know who I'm talking about. I don't know that player took my deck, and I can't really accuse him of doing so, but whoever did it is a scumbag, and I feel a lot of hate towards you right now, and that's not an emotion I like feeling. So we start off round 1, I'm not feeling into it. I play my good friend Terry Goodacre, him from Wakefield TCG, and he's a lovely chap, and I draw utterly dead. And I still draw better than him. Game 1, I side drive his Garbodor on turn 2. He's playing Evil Tau Garbodor for the win. And game 2, he gets some stuff, I get some stuff. We both draw pretty badly, but I essentially just sit there and side drive turn after turn. He does knock out one Mewtwo in almost a second with a Trubbish, which was using Pound, which was a lot of fun. But neither of these were legitimate games. I won and I went to 1-0, but it wasn't a legitimate game. Round 2, I'm drawn against Luke Kirkham. And this is unfortunate because I'm basically using his deck, and I don't really want to beat him, so I don't mind losing this game. Now, after talking to him later, it turns out I'm playing more Wobbuffet, and I'm playing Chandelure EX. He's not playing Chandelure EX, and he's playing more Mewtwo. Wobbuffet is amazing against Mewtwo. You hit him once with a Muscle Band, then a second Wobbuffet cleans up. Chandelure is amazing against Mewtwo. You put 4 damage counters on Mewtwo, and Wobbuffet 1-hit KOs. well, I suppose it KOs because it's not really a one-hit KO because he's already been hit once. Or you get 2 energy on a Chandelure, and you can use a second attack to do 70, put a muscle band on you, one-hit KOing a Mewtwo. So I had the leverage in this matchup. Either way, boatload of psychic Pokemon. These aren't going to be long games. Game 1, I would have seen my first supporter on turn 8. Needless to say, we don't get to turn 8, I lose. Game 2, Luke doesn't draw amazingly, but even so, I get Chandelure out. I'm able to get a muscle band on it so Luke can't use Headringer, which he was playing in his deck, and I get a fairly comfortable victory because Chandelure runs through Mewtwo-based decks really nicely nowadays. Something I didn't really know before, but Chandelure is just beastly. He also does 90 to a Drifblim, but then if they flip Tails on Burn, then it turns into a one-hit KO, which is quite nice. And then in Game 3, I start with a Wobbuffet, he starts with a Mewtwo, I'm feeling pretty good, I've got a Muscle Band, I Juniper, and I hit no Pokemon, I hit no Ultra Ball. So despite having drawn 15 cards from my deck, I've only drawn 1 Pokemon, I haven't drawn an Ultra Ball, I haven't drawn my computer search, and I get benched on the very next turn of the game. I'm 2 rounds in, I'm 1-1, and I've played potentially 1 legitimate game in 2 series, which is upsetting for me. My deck is, shall we say, not drawing very well. Round 3, I'm drawn against the lovely Rio, partner of Martin Cornwall, who some people will know from Aldershot Pokemon. And she's a lovely lady. She's playing Donphan. We play a very slow, relaxed game. She tells me early on she's going to scoop to me because she knows I'm after points. I tell her that I don't need her to scoop to me and that I don't, that I'm not going to stop her. Why would I stop her? But I'm not going to expect her to. Game 1, I make a silly mistake attaching a Mystery Energy to Mewtwo in order to side drive an Aegislash, who has a body saying you cannot, it can't be damaged by Pokemon with Special Energy attached. I had a basic Psychic in my hand. By the way, Mystery Energy, garbage. It's not like Strong Energy where it's worth the risk. There's a lot of downsides to playing Special Energy at the moment, not least of which Enhanced Hammer. Mystery Energy is not good enough, don't play it. It's garbage. I learnt that the hard way. And then I ended up scooping to save time. Won Game 2. I was in a good position in Game 3. We ran out of time. She gave me the win. I'm 2-1, but not very legitimately. And then I got to play... I'm just going to say it was a person playing the Metal deck. Now, I've been playing Pokemon for 4 years, and I have never, in my life, played somebody who played as slowly as this particular person. Now, Game 1 was one of the games I didn't have a supporter for 5 turns, and my opponent knows this, because I'm just drawing and passing. I'm doing very, very little. Now, I do have a Wobbuffet active, which is quite good, and I'm able to get a Dimension Valley and a Muscle Band, so I ain't doing much damage, but I'm doing a little bit of damage, and crucially, I'm turning off his abilities. Now, he was not very polite in this game, and there was a wonderful... The only highlight of this game was when he played a Jirachi, picked up his deck to grab a supporter, and I reminded him there was an active Wobbuffet. Should have seen the look on his face. But it was not a pleasant game at all. I will give you 3 examples. Now, he did get a warning for slow play from a judge, which proves my point about slow playing. There was one turn, it was his second turn of the game, he'd already searched his deck. I timed him. It took him 3 minutes to play an Ultra Ball. Just to play an Ultra Ball, decide what he's discarding, find a Pokemon. There was another moment where he spent 20 seconds looking through his discard, 20 seconds looking through his hand, another 20 seconds looking through his discard again, another 20 seconds looking through his hand again, taking about a minute and a half in total, and then passed. He sat there for a minute and a half doing nothing and then passed. And I had a chat to the person who was sitting next to him, and there was one time when his hand was 2 unplayable cards. He had a hand of 2 cards, neither of which he could play, and he sat there thinking for a good minute before passing, despite knowing for an absolute fact that there were no legitimate moves that he could make. It was not a respectful way to play the game. I asked him to hurry up a couple of times. I never was rude, I never raised my voice, I never insulted him. He unfortunately did get quite agitated, raised his voice to me, caused a lot of a bit of commotion, I believe. Told me that this is not how you treat a human being, which I think may have been a slight exaggeration, given that I was asking him to play a card game slightly faster. Interestingly, I did get taken aside by a judge at the end of the game, who was just doing their job. I bear no will towards the judge. But, she asked me about my attitude, and I reminded her that all I'd done was ask him to hurry up, and I hadn't been rude or insulted him, and the judge agreed with me. And the judge told me that, I'd scooped halfway through Game 2, which was true. And I, said that yes, but I reminded the judge that I'm allowed to scoop halfway through a game and that I hadn't done so in a loud or overly aggressive manner, and the judge agreed that essentially I hadn't done anything wrong. The judge was doing their due diligence. I bear no will towards them. They were essentially trying to get to the bottom of the situation. Although they didn't speak, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong about this, so please don't quote me on this, but I'm not aware, at least at the time, they hadn't spoken to my opponent, who had been loud and had been disrespectful. In the game, I drew dead game 1. In game 2, we got down to 2 prizes to 3, and I realised that the absolute best case scenario was I win game 2. There was no way we were going to have a game 3, not with the speed at which he'd been playing, and I scooped. I wasn't enjoying playing the game, so I scooped and went to 2-2. Sorry about that. And in my final game before I dropped, I played a lovely chap, and he was playing Malamar EX, Evil Tau Darkrai. Now, game 1... it was another one of my games where I didn't draw a supporter for the first 5 turns. But Malamar, it's got that ability where you attach an energy and it puts your opponent asleep. I stayed asleep for 4 turns. He did hit very poorly on the Maximar attack for flipping. It does 60 times the amount of energy attached to Malamar, and there were 2 turns in a row he flipped double tail, so he wasn't exactly hitting amazing off all of his flips. Game 1 I drew dead. Game 2 I had 4 of my 10 energy prized. And they weren't the first 2 prizes I took. And I was, essentially, I would play a Colress to 9 with the energy, and I wasn't able to go. So all in all, not a particularly impressive tournament. 2 wins, one of which my opponent drew completely dead, and one of which was actually a draw that my opponent gave me to win. 3 losses, 2 of which I drew absolutely dead, and one of which I half drew dead, half scooped, because I was not enjoying the game. I only really feel like I played 1 game out of that tournament, and that was when I was playing Rio, and we had 2 very interesting games. But in terms of the matches, I either won because my opponent drew dead, or I lost because I drew dead or had energy prized. It was a depressing tournament, but hey-ho, these things happen. Now, what I want to do instead is talk about some interesting decks that I saw at the tournament. Now, I've already told you about my Psychic deck, and I consider that to be a pretty interesting little deck. But what I also saw was some really interesting decks. The main one I want to talk about, and I think this will probably kind of be the last one I talk about today, other than the Psychic deck I've told you about, Virizion, Mega Manectric, Dragonite. No Genesect. And this was piloted, I believe, by Jake Walvin and Sam Taylor, a couple of friends who both piloted, I want to say, exactly the same list. I could be wrong on that respect, but they were at least very, very similar lists. And I had a chat with them about the deck, and essentially it's Virizion Genesect, but instead of Genesect you play Dragonite. Now Dragonite's got the ability which basically allows you to put it active and move all the energy from the active onto it. And they played it with Super Scoop Up. I don't know whether they played Max Potion, but that would be a deck that card that you certainly could play here. And essentially, Dragonite's pretty hard to KO. Now, it's got a weakness to Lightning, if I remember correctly. And this weakness to Lightning basically means the only kind of relevant Pokemon at the moment, which is a Lightning type, really is Mega Manectric. And it's not seeing a huge amount of play, and even when it is, you could just go with Virizion and your own Manectric. You don't have to play Dragonite. Now, Dragonite EX, for 2 grass and a lightning energy, does Jet Sonic. You may discard an energy attached to this Pokemon, it does 120, if not it does 80. Now you put a Muscle Band on there, it does 140. And essentially you play it with Super Scoop Up, and you do 140. As soon as it's about to die, you Super Scoop it up, and then you bench it, attach a Muscle Band, move the energy from the active, which is now, and you basically cycle them round. One gets hurt, and you should have a Dragonite Muscle Band in hand to stick down, stick him active, and then you Super Scoop the one on the bench, or maybe you Max Potion it if you're playing that. A really imaginative deck. The reason you play both Virizion and Mega Manectric is to essentially give you options. If you're playing against Donphan, then you get Dragonite going with Virizion, because Mega Manectric will lose straight up to Donphan. But if you're playing against something like Pyroar, you have absolutely no hope if you've got a Virizion-based deck. So what you do instead is you use Mega Manectric, who hits for 110 damage, which will KO a Pyroar, and of course it's a Mega, so that means that it's not going to be affected by Pyror's ability, and then of course you can attach energy to your Dragonite in that way, and it just makes absolute perfect sense. If you don't want to use Virizion, use Mega Manectric. If you don't want to use Mega Manectric, use Virizion, and you use Dragonite to basically circle it round. It was a superb deck, and both the people playing it made top 4. Now, it wasn't a fairly small tournament, but even so, 2 people playing a deck, both of them making top 4, their list is clearly exceptional. If at any point they're willing to release their list, I will of course do a deck breakdown on my YouTube channel. Just search PTCG Radio on YouTube. But regardless, I've given you the main information. Now, there is one other thing they used here, and they used Tornadus. And Tornadus, this is the one from way back in Black and White, which has been reprinted as promo since, hence why it's still in the format. And it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, I told you in previous podcasts that Donphan really, and Donphan was everywhere in this tournament. I should also mention Yveltal, Virizion, Genesect, Donphan everywhere. Seismitoad far less so, but Yveltal, I mean, literally at one point it looked like about half the decks were Yveltal. Virizion, Genesect and Donphan also very, very well represented. So essentially, when you're playing against something like Donphan, yeah, you can use Virizion, but Virizion isn't great against Donphan. Donphan, with all its tricks, is probably going to be able to 2-hit KO Virizion, and you can't use Mega Manectric. So you really need something which is going to survive a couple of turns. And that's where Tornadus comes in. Reprinted in Legendary Treasures, if anybody's interested. That's why it's still in the format. It wasn't reprinted as a promo. I lied to you, quite frankly, and I suppose I can only apologise for that. But it's got 110 HP, and one thing I told you about Donphan is it struggles with high HP non-EXs. Tornadus has 110 HP, but crucially it's got a resistance to fighting. Now, he can't use Silver Bangle, and he can't use Fighting Stadium. Even with a strong energy and a muscle band, it's doing 60 damage, which means it's 2-hitting you, and that is the absolute best case scenario. Now, what it does, it's got an attack for 80 damage. 80 damage and move a basic energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. 80 damage with a muscle band goes up to 100 damage, and what does Donphan like to use against decks revolving around EX Pokemon like Dragonite? Sigilyph. And how much? Or Suicune, which have 90 or 100 HP. So you get Tornadus, 80 damage with the muscle band does 100, and you get to preserve an energy in case it's KO'd next turn. It's a wonderful tech. It came in really handy against Donphan according to my conversations with them. It just seems like an exceptionally well constructed deck, and clearly it was consistent because they both made top 4. Mega Manectric, Virizion, Dragonite with just one regular non-EX Tornadus tech. A very strong deck indeed, and one which I would recommend you guys going in and having a try out of this. Now, whether it's going to lead you to the same success, whether you're going to come up with a list that's good enough, I leave that to you, dear listener. But, quite frankly, that's where we are. It's a good deck, and you should have a go with this. Now, a huge thank you to Matt Blower, Jake Wolvin, Sam Taylor, and Ollie Barnett, who just posted, as I started this podcast, I realised I didn't have the top 8 for this tournament with decks, so I posted on Facebook, and bless them, the 4 of them have just clubbed together and sorted it out for me in the half an hour I've spent recording the podcast so far. Clearly wonderful people. Something I should also mention, they also played AZ, or AZ, or however you want to pronounce it, that supporter which allows you to kind of recycle your Pokemon, and it literally reads, put one of your Pokemon into your hand, discard all cards attached to that Pokemon. So you would lose a Muscle Band, for instance, but when you put down Dragonite, you move all the energy off the damaged Dragonite to the new Dragonite, so essentially you just pick up that Dragonite and it's easy. And their A-spec of choice was Scoop Up Cyclone, Super Scoop Up without the coin flip. So you can imagine between the Super Scoop Up Cyclone and Az, if you aren't one hitting that Dragonite, and let's just be clear about this, very few cards at the moment that people are actually playing in a competitive scene are one-hit KOing a Dragonite. If you're not one-hit KOing a Dragonite, you're probably going to lose to this deck pretty darn nicely. I said Dragonite had a lightning weakness. I've been saying that for a while. I do apologise, ladies and gentlemen. It has a fairy weakness. which means even Mega Manectric isn't one-hitting it. The only thing we've got for this is Aromatisse, which is still a fringe deck. It's still seeing a little bit of play. And, you know, the Geomancy Xerneas can KO this for 3 energy, as can the non-EX Xerneas, the EX Xerneas, although I believe it would take 4 energy to do with that Pokemon. But Fairy's such a fringe card at the moment, a fringe deck, no one's really playing it. Dragonite, clearly awesome. So, in the top 8, we have Tamal Cameron with Yveltal, Drifblim. That's right. Andrew Dudek with Yveltal, Hard Charm, Super Scoop Up. A lot of Super Scoop Up. Emmanuel De Silva with Yveltal Max Potion. And Oliver Barnett with Yveltal Dusknoir, the deck with which he also made top 16 at Newport Regionals. And he has kindly provided me with the deck list for that, so I will be doing a deck breakdown on my YouTube channel. And I know I'm talking about a lot of deck breakdowns I'm planning to do in the near future, but I've got a few to do. They're going up. You should enjoy this. It's going to be good. Going into top 4, we saw Sam Taylor and Jake Wolvin, both with Virizion, Mega Manectric, Dragonite, the deck I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes. In second place, we had Alex Dow with Virgin Drifblim, and the winner was Tom Hall with Donphan, Robo Substitute, Hawlucha, etc. So essentially, when we look at the top 8, we see 4 Yveltal, 3 Virizion, 1 Donphan. Look, ladies and gentlemen, I told you that was what the meta basically was. I win. Now, to be fair, the Virizion, 2 of the 3 were with Dragonite, and I most certainly did not call that before the tournament. But Donphan is still a beast, Yveltal is still a beast, and Virizion Genesect is still a very good deck. The other decks, Virizion Dragonite, it makes me rethink my Psychic deck, to be honest, because Virizion Genesect, I know I've got a very strong matchup. Donphan, I know I've got a very strong matchup. Yveltal, especially if they play Max Potion Super Scoop Up, it makes it a lot more difficult, because my Psychic deck kind of hits and then, you know, it kind of cleans up with Dragonite, or, not Dragonite, Wobbuffet, or Drifblim, or something like that. Unless I can get all 4 of their DCs in the discard, in which case it becomes very easy. But this Virizion Dragonite deck, I mean, there aren't that many really hard counters to it. Having said that, one of them lost to Alex Dow's Virizion Genesect Drifblim, and Drifblim ain't doing nothing against them because they're not playing Special Energy. And the other one lost to Tom Hall's Donphan, so essentially both of these Virizion Dragonite decks made top 4. Both of them lost to established deck archetypes, one Virizion Genesect, one Donphan. So I'm not telling you that this is a new best deck in format, it's amazing. What I'm telling you is, it fits up there with Virizion Genesect, Yveltal and Donphan, but it doesn't necessarily beat them. Except Yveltal, which doesn't really get one-hit KOs. Having said that, if an Yveltal can come along and get a one-hit KO on Dragonite, bearing in mind Dragonite needs free energy to attack, as soon as you're one-hit KOing Dragonites, you're basically winning that game very quickly. Clearly not that difficult because, well, both Jake and Sam must have beaten Yveltal in order to make the top 4, because all the decks that lost in top 8 were Yveltal. So yeah, quite frankly, that is the tournament. There's not really much more I can really say about that. All I really want to say is that, you know, the format is starting to settle down. What we are seeing is interesting decks like the Psychic deck, and especially like Virizion Dragonite, but the format is still largely consisting of Yveltal, Donphan, Virizion Genesect. I am really on a knife edge as to whether I think Seismitoad is relevant or not. It clearly was relevant in Manchester, taking a few of the spots in Top Cut, but it was not particularly relevant in Cornwall. There were a few people playing it, they didn't do particularly well. Having said that, the players that managed to get Top Cut in Manchester were really strong players, and maybe the people that played it in Cornwall were less strong players. I don't know is the honest answer there, ladies and gentlemen. But I think that's pretty much going to do it for today. Over the next week or two, I think I've got my technical problems sorted out at my new house. Did I mention on last week's podcast I'd moved? I may have mentioned it once or twice. So there's going to be more YouTube stuff going up there. What's going up today is my testing list of Seismitoad hammers, but in the next couple of weeks you're going to be looking for Reese Williams' very interesting Seismitoad list with just 4 DCE, with which he made top 8 at Manchester Regionals. You'll be seeing Oliver Barnett's Yveltal Dusknoir deck going up there in the near future. I may put a Psychic deck up there, I'll have to see, and I will see if Jake or Sam will be nice enough to give me a Dragonite list which I can have a look at on my YouTube channel, although presumably they won't want me to until after the last regionals in a couple of weeks' time. As always, if you've got any questions, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk or tweet me at the Wassy. And just an extra special thank you to the few people who tweeted and messaged me on Facebook today telling me they were waiting for the podcast. It was very nice to hear. It always makes my day when I get nice messages like that from people. So if you've got any questions, comments, queries or quibbles with the podcast, or you just want to say hello, do tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. If you're listening on YouTube, just leave a comment down below, subscribe, you know how this all works. I will be back next week, hopefully with a look at the new Japanese set, and as I'm now settled in, we can be expecting the podcast to be on a Wednesday every week again, unlike the stupid Thursday podcast we had last week. The podcast wasn't stupid, but the timing could have been better. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.